Yep, welcome everybody to the Bradford Cloud User Group. This is our March, it's our March event. So it's our second event that we've hosted. So it's going to give you a quick overview of what you can expect. So we have session one, which is going to be around Azure Stack Portfolio, presented by Microsoft Azure MVP Lisa Clark. So that should be a great session. Do a bit of a Q&A after that. And then we have session two, which is Microsoft's evolution of Azure VMware Solutions, or AVS, presented by Microsoft Cloud Advocate Shannon Keane. I've been practicing that to make sure I pronounce it right.
Thank you. You get a gold star. And I can just blame my ridiculous family for deciding that was the right way to pronounce it. That's not at all.
Believe it or not, me, Imran, and Saj, we had a conversation specifically about this to make sure we all pronounce it correctly.
I appreciate it.
And then we'll have obviously a Q&A after that. And then we've actually got a bonus session today, which is one of the ones I'm looking forward to. So Lisa and Shannon are going to team up and give us a session on how to be better allies to women, presented by Lisa and Shannon. And for those of you who follow us on social media, you know that we've been doing we've dedicated the whole month to women in tech. Obviously, March the 8th was International Women's Day. We've been giving shout outs to our Twitter handle to various women within the tech community and bigging up all the things they do. And this is again our event is also dedicated to women in tech. We've got Lisa and Shannon on, who are massive advocates of that, and two of the probably leading ladies within the tech community. So thank you to you both for making the time. What I will do is I'll hand over to Lisa to do her session.
Awesome, thanks guys. Thanks for having us. I'm super excited. This is, do you know what? This is the first of, so it's my first presentation as an MVP, I think, external. My first user group talk in, I'm really not sure how long. I know, yeah, so and actually my first virtual user group talk as well. So yeah, awesome. Right, let me get my screen set up and make sure that we are sharing the right things. 2 seconds. I'm just going to, I changed my monitors around recently and I'm still getting used to it. Right, let's go. And this is the screen we want to share. Right, well, good.
Yeah, we can see that.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Super excited to be here. We'll move on to the next slide, the quick introduction, because it says all the same stuff. So a little bit about me. I am recently awarded Microsoft MVP at Azure. Was awarded in March, so that's super exciting. I work at Dell Technologies, and I am, my job title is a long and interesting one. EMEA Azure Stack Business Strategist at Dell Technologies. You can find me on Twitter at LisaAtTheEdge, and you can also check out lisaattheedge.com and my podcast. Just search for Lisa at the Edge on whatever platform that it is you like to listen on. I am based in Dundee, Scotland. Apparently the sunniest city in Scotland, would you believe? I was thinking about this the other day because I only recently put a sort of intro about me slide together, I think just a month ago. And yeah, counted it up and I've been in the industry for 10 years, which is mental to say. But I feel kind of cool now that I get to be one of those people who can say, I've been in the industry for 10 years, even though I look about 12. I'm responsible for driving the Dell Azure Stack business across EMEA. What does that mean? My job is super varied, and that's what I love about it. I get to work really, really closely with the Microsoft Azure Stack specialists across EMEA, and work tightly with their sales teams and specialist teams to make sure that we can work together as best we can. Not everyone knows this, but Dell is actually Microsoft's largest partner. We've been partners for over 30 years. Dell has been involved in every iteration of Microsoft's on-premise cloud, and we're the only OEM to be able to say that as well. And then I get to work with customers and I get to enable our salespeople and our pre-sales people, working really closely right now with the channel team across EMEA, so getting to engage with our partners, which is awesome. Kicked off the Lisa at the Edge podcast last March when we went into lockdown, and I thought, well, if I don't do this now, I never will, so I did. And that has grown over the last year, and I love doing that. It's now kind of taken the form of I get people to share how they got into tech, and then we'll talk about a tech hot topic at a level which can be understood by techies and non-techies. Last year also was lucky enough to be awarded the Microsoft Community Hero and Inclusive Leader badges, which is really cool. For those of you who do follow me on Twitter, you'll know I'm a crazy cat lady, also like Shannon, so that's good, we're in good company. And I'm not actually a techie, so I'm not actually technical. But actually, I just tweeted before this user group, that's what I'm starting to think about now. Do I start to get technical? If I'm going to do that, what route do I go down? I've got all these Azure credits as an MVP, so we need to get using them. Okay, on to the topic of hand. So, why Microsoft hybrid cloud? The reality of today is that hybrid cloud is here to stay. Actually, it's kind of like the new cool thing with Edge and all that chat. But why Microsoft hybrid cloud in particular? I think we can all agree that there's still some key reasons for hybrid, and there's reasons that it's sticking around. Some workloads can't be moved to the public cloud due to regulatory and data sovereignty requirements. We have customers with those examples, specifically common in highly regulated industries like financial and healthcare and government. Some workloads, especially those workloads, those edge workloads, will require low latency. We can't as yet break the speed of light. So, until then, we're going to need some stuff at the edge. Many companies have significant on-premises investments that they want to maximize. So they choose to modernize what they have on-prem in their data centers. And Microsoft is all about bringing Azure services everywhere now and bringing Azure services to those workloads. So take a hybrid approach is a very sensible approach for a lot of our customers that we see today at Dell and loads of other people that I speak to as well. And if we take a look at the Azure ecosystem, right, there are now 70 plus regions, Azure regions. That's more than AWS and Google combined. We used to write the specific number of regions on this slide, but they update so fast that it's hard to keep track of them. As you can see though, that overlaid on the world map still leaves a lot of gaps, right? So, you've got service providers there, and then you've also got enterprises there, and there's still gaps. So even though Microsoft is opening up Azure regions at a significant rate, there is still a big need for hybrid workloads to remain near to their customers, near to the data. And the Azure Stack portfolio is Microsoft's way of this one Azure ecosystem and bringing Azure services to those workloads. So not to leave them out, right? Not to leave them out of the innovation game, but also to empower those workloads as well. I also think it's crazy that Azure now has more regions than both AWS and Google combined. And the Azure Stack portfolio will just go on to expand that. So let's take a little look at the Azure Stack portfolio. I've got a few slides sort of showing the difference between the products within the portfolio, and then we'll dig into each of them in just a little bit more detail. So here, does this slide build up? Yes, this slide builds up. This is one of our new ones. I actually quite like it. So there's three products within the Azure Stack portfolio. You've got Azure Stack Edge, you've got Azure Stack Hci, and you've got Azure Stack Hub. Way back before, I want to say, MS Ignite in 2019, you only had Azure Stack, and that was what's now called Azure Stack Hub. So you only had the one product, and that has gone on to cause all kinds of issues whilst expanding this portfolio and bringing new products as we try and continually explain what the difference is between the products within the portfolio and the fact that the portfolio has expanded. So just really quickly, because I'm going to go into another slide that sort of takes a look from an IT ops view of what's underneath the hood in each of these products so you can better sort of get an idea of where they're best suited. So Azure Stack Hci is a Microsoft first-party product, so you can consume that as a service from Microsoft. So you go on, you log into your Azure portal, and you say you want Azure Stack Hci, and Azure Stack Hci is shipped to you, and you use it, and then you ship it back when you're no longer using it. And this is designed specifically for performing accelerated inferencing, with Azure Machine Learning, processing of data before sending it to Azure, and deeper learning and analytics. And it can also be used for transferring of data to Azure. So that's Azure Stack Hci. It comes in, I think there's 3 different form factors, and you've got a ruggedized version as well. You have to manage Azure Stack Hci from the portal. So you'll see as we go through the portfolio and the products, a differentiation is what tools and where do you manage each from. Azure Stack Hci must be managed from the public Azure portal. I'll now just actually quickly cover Arc. So we've all heard about Azure Arc. It's the big hot topic right now. This is used to extend Azure management capabilities to on-premises or other clouds, and extends the Azure control plane. So it extends the secret sauce, the magic sauce of Azure, and ARM, Azure Resource Manager, and can provide governance and monitoring capabilities to workloads that you have residing elsewhere and bring them in line with the model that you've created for your Azure workloads. So you can use policies, Azure Monitor, Azure Security Center, etc., and get that one view of all your workloads, regardless of where they are. Even bare metal stuff running in AWS, stuff on-prem running on VMware. It's crazy. We won't go into that today though. So then we've got Azure Stack Hci and Azure Stack Hub. Azure Stack Hub is my baby. I was involved with Azure Stack Hub prior to it launching. I remember going to an Azure Stack Airlift in Seattle many moons ago, and I stuck out like a sore thumb because I was this like excited young blonde girl running about this sea of engineers, super excited about Azure Stack Hub. Azure Stack Hub is, when you think about it, quite amazing, quite an engineering feat. It's a co-engineered appliance by Microsoft and OEMs, so in my case, Dell. And it literally brings Azure to your data center. So it's like a small mini region of Azure running within your data center. And it will bring the Azure portal, the Azure Marketplace, and specific Azure PaaS services and Azure IaaS to on-prem. And it can operate disconnected. It's honestly amazing. Azure Stack Hci, this is the newly launched product within the portfolio. Microsoft GA'd this in December last year. Dell just went to launch in February this year. Azure Stack Hci is a brand new operating system. So it's a fork from Windows Server 2019. Brand new operating system, brings with it features like stretch clustering, which I know everyone's been wanting from Hyper-V for a long time. That is my cat. and I've now just lost my train of thought. It's the Azure Stack Hci OS is delivered as an Azure service, so you're consuming it from Azure, and it's also therefore gives you that connection to Azure and allows you to use certain Azure services on your hyper-converged infrastructure. We'll go into this in more detail in a bit. So just really quickly, I like this slide. It gives a sort of view from an IT ops view into the products to give you a feel of what they actually mean. So I really like this. So if you look across Azure and Azure Stack Hub, you'll see that what you're using there is Azure Portal, the API, IaaS and PaaS. You're in Hub and Azure, you're using the same Azure portal. So if you've written templates in ARM and you use them in Azure, quick tweak, and you can use them in Azure Stack Hub. In Azure, you're using the hundreds of services across the 70+ regions, the compute, storage, and networking, all taken care of by Microsoft. With Azure Stack Hub and Azure Stack Hci, underneath is essentially the same hyper-converged infrastructure, and it's delivered by an OEM. With Azure Stack Hub, you're still using the portal. You will have to take on a cloud, what have they called it now? A cloud operator role. So you will have to do things like manage your marketplace, create offers, plans, and subscriptions. So things that Microsoft would traditionally do in Azure, you'll need to do that as part of an Azure Stack Hub operator. But when it comes to patch and update, etc., Microsoft have automated that for you, and your OEM like Dell have integrated and automated that for you. In Azure Stack Hci, again, same pretty much underlying hardware, but you're using your Windows Admin Center. So actually with Azure Stack Hci, you can use your Windows Admin Center. You can actually use the Azure portal, which needs added into this slide. And then, for instance, Dell, we've integrated our Open Manage lifecycle management into Windows Admin Center to give a sort of seamless experience. So that's the sort of 3 products within the portfolio with Edge as well. And a good way to think about this is, I think if this builds out, yes, is to think about Azure Stack Hub is really bringing Azure on-premise, really suited to those niche edge disconnected scenarios. Azure Stack Hci is connecting your on-prem HCI environment to Azure and taking advantage of Azure services. So just a little bit more on each of the 3 products. So like I said before, Azure Stack Edge, optimized for edge compute, machine learning, and IoT scenarios, and that's really its specific use case. So you can actually choose between 2 different hardware options, a commercial CDs and a ruggedized CDs. Azure Stack Edge does have a number of capabilities, so you can actually run VMs and Azure Kubernetes clusters, but it really is designed for those at the edge, machine learning and IoT scenarios, maybe acting as a cloud storage gateway to transfer to Azure. But again, yes, you have to manage through the Azure portal. A few use cases are processing at the edge for immediate results, filtering image that's coming in, doing the analysis at the edge, and then passing that data to Azure. You know, there might be some things that you want to take out of that data, personalized information, faces, etc., that you don't want to pass up to Azure, but you want to aggregate it, pass it up to Azure to do more analytics. We see a lot of scenarios within Dell where the customer is using Azure Edge in conjunction with Hub, in conjunction with Azure Stack Hci and Azure. Factories are quite a big one there. When it comes to Azure Stack Hub, so again, going in a little bit in more detail, and honestly, it still blows my mind to this day that you can basically get the Azure portal, the Azure Marketplace, ARM, basically Azure in your data center on as little as 4 nodes. And if you think about the size of like Azure data centers, crazy, blows my mind. And the idea behind this is, you know, disconnected scenarios are a big one. For those who have really strict regulatory and data sovereignty use cases, and those who want to modernize applications but on-prem. So they've got applications, they, for whatever reason, cannot move to Azure, but they do want to modernize them. So they want to even just to the IaaS, even just to modernize the way that they do infrastructure as code, for instance. So I think this is just basically another slide that says the same thing. My cats are going crazy. I'm glad to see that they're all feeling better after their days at the vets. So yeah, basically, you know, you've got your portal, you've got PowerShell, you've got all your DevOps tools that you're used to within Hub. You can use Azure Resource Manager and Azure Services. Just taking a closer look at some of the use cases for Hub. So you've got edge and disconnected solutions. So addressing latency and connectivity requirements by, like we've said, processing the data locally in Azure Stack Hub, aggregating it in Azure for further analytics, with your common application logic across both. There's a variety of these use cases. I would say the ones for Hub are becoming more and more niche, especially with Azure Stack Hci coming on board, which we'll look at in a minute. I think we see a lot in places that either have no connectivity or for whatever reason cannot connect, so potentially defense. But yeah, so that's I would say is a big one. I think the other one is being able to develop and deploy applications at a global scale, but then perhaps deploy them in regions where maybe public Azure isn't available. Or actually, we've got an example where a customer built an online gaming application within Azure, with the goal of delivering that robust playing experience for gamers globally. With Azure and Azure Stack Hub, there's a sort of, that gives them that level of deployment flexibility to meet the goal. We also had an example of a gambling customer who developed their application in Azure, but for regulatory reasons in certain countries, they couldn't use Azure regions, and therefore it had to go on Hub within the country. And application modernization, like I touched on before, Hub delivers a core set of modern application architectures on premise, so that customers can modernize their app portfolio across the hybrid cloud environments. So when it comes to Hub, you can use Azure App Service for mobile apps and web apps and API apps. You can also use containers. You've got AKS engine in there. With Hub, actually spoke to a customer the other week who is looking to modernize their application, tried it on Azure, but because they can't control the versioning of Kubernetes, they want to look at Hub so that they can have a little bit more control under the hood for their application. So they're looking at that. And also consistent Azure IaaS services that go beyond, obviously, your traditional virtualization. So you can do IaaS type on your virtualization virtualized infrastructures, but with Hub, you're getting the full Azure IaaS shebang, as I like to call it, and that really is a world of difference. There's a really good blog series actually on IaaS use cases for Hub. So yeah, this is just another slide that basically shows what Azure and Azure Stack Hub are trying to do. They're trying to provide that one Azure ecosystem for unified app development within your data centers. One of the problems we do see with Hub is sometimes we'll be speaking to the developer team within the customer, or we'll be speaking to the infrastructure team within the customer. They're not talking to each other, and both of them have different expectations about what Hub is or what would be required to manage it. So it's really one of those products that you have to bring both of those teams together to realize success with it. Okay, Azure Stack Hci, and I'm going to try and do this really quickly. So Azure Stack Hci is basically optimized for running your virtualized workloads on-prem. So if you've got a bunch of virtual machines and workloads that are running on-prem, you're not going to refactor, replatform, move them to Azure. They're going to stay on-prem for whatever reason, but you want to modernize either the infrastructure that they run on, so you want to move from a 3-tier to a hyper-converged infrastructure and gain the efficiencies and the operational efficiencies that come from that, grand. But say you do have an Azure strategy and you've got workloads in public Azure, you want to have consistency across those workloads. And Azure Stack Hci gives you that. You have the ability to view all of your Azure Stack Hci clusters from public Azure, and again, apply things like Azure policies for governance perspectives or Azure monitoring to your workloads running within Azure Stack Hci. It's basically only day-dot for that operating system. It's kind of a fork from Windows Server. It will improve and update at a speed far greater than the traditional Windows Server license because it's delivered as an Azure service, and I think that's why they've paired it off. It allows them to focus on the things they want to bring to Azure Stack Hci without worrying about what they break in terms of Windows Server. So yeah, all about basically consolidating your server infrastructure, modernizing it, and then connecting to your cloud management. The technical use cases are wide and varied for Azure Stack Hci. You've got everything from what I've just said, hardware refresh, Hyper-V refresh, right the way up to sort of using them for high performance, latency sensitive applications like SQL. A really great use case of Azure Stack HCI is the remote office and branch office, the robo use case, because you can start as little as 2 node switch list for Azure Stack HCI. And also, AKS is coming to Azure Stack HCI. That's in preview right now, and that I think is going to be super exciting. And with the likes of Azure Arc developing as well, more and more services are going to come to Azure Stack HCI. I think you'll see Microsoft containerizing more of their services and delivering them to the Azure Stack portfolio. So just taking a little look at what Azure Stack HCI is under the hood and what it's made up of. If we start from the bottom up, at the foundation, from a Dell perspective, we've got our AX nodes that have been designed specifically to run Azure Stack HCI OS. And as you can imagine, so Dell are like HCI leaders in the world. And also we're all about our lifecycle management. So we've brought that expertise to providing the turnkey experience for deployment and lifecycle management to Azure Stack HCI. So then you've got the Azure Stack HCI OS delivered as a service from Azure. Briefly just cover the licensing of that. Azure Stack HCI is licensed at $10 per core per month. So that's that simple. You can actually turn off cores. You may or may not want to do that, but you can. That's why it needs to be connected to Azure. It needs to connect every 30 days for billing purposes. So that cost provides you with all the capabilities from the operating system. But then, of course, you would need to license your workloads running on top, so your Windows VMs running on top. You could license them as standard licensing, Windows Server license. You could use a data center license if the number of workloads you were running sort of made that more cost effective. If you're running Linux, then you don't need to, it's just the $10 per core per month. So you can run Linux, Windows, Azure AKS will be coming, Azure Kubernetes service for running containers. It's a real blending of the traditional world and the cloud native world. For instance, if you want to run your traditional VMs but also want to take advantage of AKS, you can do all of that on Azure Stack HCI. It's blurring the lines more and more between cloud and on-prem. So yeah, I'm really excited about this product. I think it'll be really interesting to see where it goes. Dell have worked really, really hard at the lifecycle management piece because customers are expecting more and more of that type of experience, and you don't want it to be night and day between you managing your Azure workloads and then Azure managing workloads on-prem. So again, and this is a question I always ask every time something new comes out in the Azure Stack portfolio. I'm always asking, okay, so what portals and management tools do customers use with each offering? And Microsoft is great at providing options, right? And it's great, choice is good, but sometimes it's hard to know what the perfect service or offering or tool is for your specific use case. So with Azure Stack HCI, you can use all the things you're familiar with if you're a Hyper-V customer. So you can use your Windows Admin Center. You can do pretty much everything within the Windows Admin Center because you can connect to Azure. And that's where you can see all of the Dell Open Managed full lifecycle management stuff and health status of all your firmware, etc. So it's a really good view there. But then also you can use the Azure portal to manage it, which is really good for if you think about a customer who's maybe a factory who has loads of Azure Stack, maybe Edge and Azure Stack HCI appliances out at their factories. They can see that globally from the Azure portal, and then you can integrate things like Azure Monitor and Azure Security Center. And something I get really excited about is the ability to apply governance constructs like tags and access controls. I love like resource manager and tagging and policies, etc. in Azure. I just think that's so valuable. And the ability to then bring that on-prem as well is just phenomenal. So Microsoft basically like to say, of course they would, that the 5 characteristics of a trusted hybrid cloud provider would be basically, we'll shorten this down, it's that consistency. That's what they're really, really aiming at, is consistency across your on-prem and your in the cloud workloads or workloads wherever they might be with Azure Arc, allowing you to maximize investments that you already have on-prem, and and support the key needs like data sovereignty, and be able to apply security across them in a unified way as well. So that's my quick whistle-stop tour through the Azure Stack portfolio: Azure Stack Edge, Azure Stack Hub, and Azure Stack Hci. Thanks very much. And if anyone has any questions, then yeah, just let me know.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Could we all come off mute, give a round of applause?
Oh, thanks. I was a bit tongue-tied at many points there, but thanks, guys.
You did really well. I nicked the idea off the Welsh Azure user group. You know, the round of applause one. Cheers, John. I think he's on here, isn't he? Yeah, he is. Questions, anyone? I think there was one question posted, but I think you covered that, Lisa. What's the cost model of HCI?
Yeah. So it's $10 per core per month for the operating system, and then obviously you need to license your workloads on top. There will be, so right now you can use like individual Windows Server licenses, or say you've got 12 to 15 VMs running per host, you'd probably just you just whack on a Windows Server data center license because it gives you unlimited guest OSs. But there will be other ways coming down the pipe as to how to license those Windows workloads. Probably more as like pay-as-you-go type thing from Azure Service. In terms of then consuming Azure services on top of that, so some things will be free and included, but then I imagine that if you want to start layering on Azure Security Center, but then maybe some of the higher tiers, you would get paid for that. We don't have a cost model yet for AKS, it's in preview. So that'll be coming out, but I'm sure that Microsoft are very aware of, you've got Google Anthos right now, you've got VMware doing things with Tanzu, so I'm sure they'll try and be competitive. But yeah, so it's licensing the OS, licensing the workloads, and then consuming any Azure services that you consume through. That's the kind of 3 buckets that falls into.
Thank you, Lisa.
I've got a question. I saw one of the slides, it mentioned VDI, so I'm
Yes.
the UC world, WVD is huge. Is there anything in the pipeline to integrate with WVD at all? 'Cause obviously that's a cloud-only hosted solution at the moment. Do you know if that's something they're looking at potentially?
So I think, now I don't want to talk out of turn, but I think that it is, and also, hold on, because I'm just reading the notes that are actually in the slide from. So it says, great cost licensing use case with Azure Stack Hci. You pay the core licensing per month, and then the Windows 10 licenses on top of that. Typically, blah blah. So yeah, but So I don't know if it is or not, but I'm going to find out and I'll come back to you. Also, the MVP summit is next week, and I've seen a few sessions, so I'll see if we can find out. But I will find out the answer and get back to you.
It just seems like a natural progression, I suppose.
Yes, absolutely. And this is why there's things rattling about in my head that I know I've heard, but I would want to confirm before I said. But I can have a wee look just now anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
No worries.
I know at one point, if you were a person experimenting with Azure Stack, you could get like one node. Is that still even a thing?
Yep. So for Azure Stack Hub, there is the ASDK, the Azure Stack Development Kit. And you can basically download the software for free from Microsoft. And there's something in Microsoft Docs as well that tells you like the minimum spec that you'd want for that. So for instance, there's like a low spec if you just wanted to run IaaS services. You then wanted to deploy some PaaS services. You need a bit of a beefier one, but you can do that. There's also this other dev thing for Azure Stack Hci is WS Labs. So WS Labs, you can then test Azure Stack Hci in. And in fact, I think my friend and colleague Kenny has deployed WS Labs. Within that, has deployed the ASDK and an Azure Stack Hci cluster. So that there are definitely ways that you can.
Cool.
Yes, that is it. That is it. That's the link in the chat.
Do you know if they've got around the having to reinstall every time there's an upgrade?
Yeah, I don't think that they have changed
Right.
that. So basically what Mike's saying there is the ASDK, you can test like 90% of Azure Stack Hub features on it, but you can't test like real performance, networking, or the update process. You have to reinstall and redeploy every time. That's because they don't want you to use it as production, right? So that, you're not charged for anything you use in that. So I don't think that they have changed that. And if I'm honest, I've not heard much about the ESDK development in a while. I'm not sure how much they'll keep up with that. Again, another question that I want to ask next week to the product group. But yeah.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
If anyone's got any questions and they don't want to speak up, you can always type it in chat. Okay, let's move on to our next amazing guest, who was traveled virtually all the way from West.
Yeah, Chicago, Illinois. Believe it or not, it's still it's not even 3 p.m. my time. So you're probably hopefully fed, and hopefully you're not falling asleep, and hopefully I don't make you fall asleep. So
Does that mean we can have a second lunch?
yeah, I mean, yes, I say go for it. I say go for it.
Okay.
All
Yeah.
right.
Well, yes, it's Shannon. Shannon Keane. She's a senior Microsoft Cloud Advocate, and she's now going to give us an overview of Azure VMware solution. So over to you, Shannon.
Perfect. Thank you. So I am a senior cloud advocate on the enterprise platforms and tools team. What we focus on is we focus on ways in which to reach the enterprise. So Microsoft's done a really good job of reaching the developer where the developer's at. We didn't do a great job on the same front with administrators. So we're now starting to do that, and one of the sub-teams inside of the methods and practices teams is to focus on the enterprise platforms and tools. And with ABS being a hot topic right now, that's one of the areas I focus on almost exclusively. These are ways to reach me. That's my Twitter handle. That's my LinkedIn handle. It dawned on me as I was sharing my screen, I don't have a series of links, but I would love to pass them along. So I don't know if you're sharing this. I'll definitely send over some links to dig into ABS. We've got some great hands-on labs that VMware has worked in joint venture with Microsoft on, as well as we have a brand new Learn module. So I just published that late last week with the Learn team, and we're looking good on that front. So let's start with the introduction and background. I think that's pretty important here when we talk about why this is even a service, because I myself had a little bit of a doubt, right? Couldn't figure out why we would even have Azure VMware solution. And then I started thinking about some of the conversations that I had. So if you look at the cloud migration considerations, you've got the need for speed. So you want to be able to provision new resources quickly. You don't want to have it take months, weeks, however long it takes you and your team. You have to think about software life cycling. You have to think about hardware life cycling. You may need more capacity than what you have at the moment. And that's why it's hard, because especially right now, right? It's hard to get a brand new server in a fast fashion. And then you're at the kind of the will of maybe your colo provider or your data center provider if you're leaning on a third party to help you manage your environment. So you want to be able to provision infrastructure quickly. ABS can help. When you think about cost and complexity, that's another migration consideration. You know, the idea here is we're moving from CapEx to OpEx, and it's a very slow transition. It's unfortunately not super fast, which is not really a bad thing per se. It's just shifting the mindset. And so this is a fixed cost, and you're able to project what it's going to cost month over month, year over year. There are ways you can think about pricing incentives to reduce the overall cost. You don't have to really refactor your application. It's really a faster reality than a lift and shift migration into Azure using something like Azure Migrate or any of the third-party tools. And then you can think about business continuity as being another aspect of cloud migration. You don't want to have to pay that colo vendor of yours. You're tired of that cost. It's sort of a sunk cost. You're not really seeing the benefits of it. Wouldn't it be awesome to plug that into Azure and have that be the way in which you have your BCDR components thought through? You have to think through change management, think through the skilling aspects. You have to think through your operations as well. It's not an easy reality to go from traditional on-prem to embracing IaaS. I think a lot of us have gone through it. A lot of us are still going through it. And a lot of us who've been in it for years and years and years still feel like a kid in a candy store, because it just keeps changing, and everything gets cooler and cooler, and the evolutions are hard to keep up with. So these are some of the migration considerations that we tend to see when we have larger conversations with customers. So Azure VMware Solution delivers that comprehensive VMware environment on-prem that you've come to know and love and expect and enjoy, right? You get that now inside of Azure. So it's the dawning of a brand new day here where you don't have to think about embracing IaaS or picking apart the different PaaS components and making your monolithic app be a little bit more agile. You can take your whole entire environment as it exists on-prem, place that environment into Azure. You can migrate back and forth. You can vMotion using Hcx Enterprise into Azure without a lot of friction, without the quote-unquote analysis by paralysis. So many enterprises get stuck in that sort of side of digital transformation. When you speed up the process here, you get an idea of the faster reality of having AVS sitting in your environment. So you get VMware vSAN, vSphere, vCenter. So you get all three of those when you deploy this, as well as Hcx. So you gain a lot of cool features without having to spend months in a migration pattern. I think a lot of us have been living in that world prior to the advent of cloud, and it's not a fun reality when you're trying to go through your vCenter upgrades or your vSphere upgrades. So these are the regions where Azure VMware Solution exists at the moment. We are adding more regions as we are having this conversation. I don't have anything to share though. There's nothing that on here that doesn't show up inside of our actual products page inside the Azure products per region. But it's awesome because we had a first version of this and it really was only in I think 2 or 3 different regions. So the fact that we're in West US, Canada Central, North Central, East US, North Europe, UK South, West Europe, Southeast Asia, Japan East, and Australia East shows you that we are actually investing heavily in this solution because we want customers to realize we are finally meeting you where you are. If it's hard for you to break through well, my boss calls it operational excellence. I call it technical debt. It's kind of the same thing. If it's hard for you to kind of whack at some of that, this is an awesome solution to help you kind of move forward, add some agility to what your operations team will handle. So this is how you get started. You know, the use cases here are our data center expansion, reduction, or retirement, the speed and simplification of migration and hybrid cloud, right? Disaster recovery and business continuity, the app and business modernization scenario as well. That's a super exciting thing. We want to have customers go through and plan and deploy. You never know what you have until you go through that assessment period. So there are tools you can lean on that help you figure out what you have. And then there's the migration pattern where you're leaning on Hcx Enterprise to have those VMs vMotion from on-prem into Azure, which is awesome. I think a lot of us love that technology. I knew it kind of blew up my mind, realizing you could move VMs in between different hosts. Well, now you can move them in between different environments, completely geographically separate as well. Then there's the idea of managing and operating. So we've got a number of certifications that are kind of available right now. There are always audits that are happening, and I know that, so I think it's a 1-year cycle. It might be a 6-month cycle. And I know they're trying to get more of this certified because the idea is they want this to go to the government clouds and the sovereign clouds. It's not yet there, but it's not to say that it's not on the roadmap. So that's something to factor in as well. And then you have the idea here of, VMware tooling. So, you can think about the VMware Cloud Foundation stack, which is, vSAN, NSXT, HCX, et cetera. And then you get the idea here of being able to modernize. So I joke often, this is like achievement unlocked. Getting so much closer to the ARM APIs, that's the biggest hurdle. So when you have your platform living in Azure, you don't have to do as much as you would if your environment was on-prem. Everything's so much closer, so long as you integrate the environment from a networking component, and I'll talk about that, you're able to gain access to all of the Azure services. So I think a lot of us have seen this slide here, but it doesn't have Azure VMware Solution at the center. I saw this recently and I screen grabbed it and I said, this is a perfect speaking point, because the same conversation can be had surrounding how you embrace Azure. So you can govern, configure, monitor, protect, secure, but you can also think about this as extending your VMware functionality. So you do get vCenter out the gate, you get vSphere, vSAN, NSXT, HCX, but then you have all of these extra tools that you didn't necessarily have access to because they sit so much closer, and you can do the same types of configuration patterns or same types of best practices with your Azure VMware solution stack. So I really like this just to hit it home that while it is VMware, it's VMware sitting on Azure, and you get access to all of the Azure ARM APIs because everything's so much closer. So I want to talk through the new and differentiated features. So we did have a version 1.0 of the offering. It's called Cloud Simple. You may have seen it. Cloud Simple is no longer, well, it's still supported. So if you were a customer that embraced Cloud Simple, that's still supported. Brand new customers are migrating towards this second iteration, just called Azure VMware Solution. So first and foremost, it's a first-party Azure service. It's cloud certified by VMware. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's one of those things where you desire the actual app, the actual workload to be deployed, and then it's deployed inside of your tenant, and then you've got VMware sitting on there, right? So if there's ever a problem, you don't have to go and open up a ticket with Microsoft and VMware. You just open up a ticket with Microsoft, which is super awesome because prior to, iterations that had come before in various clouds, you had to open up 2 tickets sometimes. It's just 1 ticket. So that's what that essentially means, right? It's a first-party Azure service. It's cloud certified by VMware. VMware will support it if there's something wrong with the VMware sides of your stack. There's that seamless Azure experience as well, so there's a native integration. The version 1.0, you had to go to a different portal to manage your AVS environment. So everything's in the same portal. Makes it so much simpler. You have capacity to use your Azure hybrid use benefit for Windows and SQL Server. So if you are a heavy Windows shop, you don't have to worry about the licensing model. So long as you've got your data center, your software assurance, you can think about the Azure Hybrid Use Benefit licensing. The extended security updates come as a feature of this as well. So if you're running a legacy app that you can't just get rid of right now, you'd love to, but you can't, you can migrate it into Azure and you don't have to pay for those security updates. It's a single point of support, and I should have read these slides a little bit. It's been a bit since I've talked about this specific slide. So to really hit it home, you only call Microsoft, which is awesome. This supports the latest VMware technology updates. So I will say it's not the most latest. I think if you are a VMware geek like myself, you know that vSphere 7's out, and there's multiple updates that have come out since 7.0 released late last year. This is about a version behind, and there's a reason. We want to be able to validate the software bundle. We don't want to have this, because we're deploying it to a number of different customers, right? And we're handling the deployment process, the host allocation, et cetera. We want to make sure it's 100% validated, and it's validated a number of different kind of testing scenarios. Hcx Enterprise Edition is available. So right now, it's advanced, but in order to do that migration pattern from on-prem into Azure, you need the Enterprise Edition. And these are dedicated hosts to you, which is awesome. It's not logically separate. They are dedicated to you. There's the unified licensing and consumption components here, so it's not a tricky licensing model. There's not, somebody doesn't need to have a degree in licensing to figure out how the costs are accounted for on a monthly basis. And there's a simplified NSX interface, so I'll talk through that as well. These are the hardware and software specifications that were present once we reached GA. So these are being, they're going to always go through a series of evolutions, but right now it's 6.7 Update 3 Enterprise Plus, 6.7 Update 3 Standard, goes on kind of down the list here. That's everything on the software side. The hardware side, it's 1 SKU. Additional SKUs are in the works. People are thinking about the right way to approach the product holistically, but right now it's just AV36. That's the CPU architecture, that's how much memory, that's what your vSAN caching looks like, that's what your vSAN capacity is, and the same rules apply. I think it's got to be 30% available, so you've got to make sure that you don't over-provision your vSAN, otherwise it will come to a screeching halt. And that's what the networking looks like. So it's an hourly pay-as-you-go billing model. And you can think about reserved instances as well. So you don't have to be stuck in this, I'm just paying for this forever and ever and ever. No, there's reserved instances that you can think about related to the overall cost structure. The big piece here, though, is it requires 3 nodes, so you can't go under 3. That's kind of the, I guess, the bar, the point of entry. But you can't expand up and expand back based upon demand and need. So it's just like any other VMware environment that you manage and maintain. Just remember, you can't go lower than 3. And I won't spend too much time on here. It dawned on me that's what we had kind of already gone through earlier in the deck, but I'll hit home here, right? Data center expansion, reduction or retirement, disaster recovery and business continuity. You could think about AVS being that DR site for you. Speed and simplification of migration. You don't have to deploy Azure Migrate. You don't have to stand up Azure Site Recovery or anything of that sort. You don't have to stand up an ISV tool. This can actually vMotion your VMs as VM objects living in vSphere into Azure with vMotion and the Hcx Enterprise tool. Then you can think about application modernization as well, right? So you don't have to embrace IaaS out the gate. You could pick apart what you want and would like to understand and get to know better. You don't have to go to kind of version 1.0 when you're not really quite ready for that. So you could think about Azure Active Directory, integrating on that front. You could think about integrating with Azure Security Center, Azure Monitor, any of the Azure services that kind of sit in that operations side. This is an awesome opportunity for you to kind of think through modernizing your operations. Let's talk through the deployment steps real quick here. So to deploy the private cloud, you have to just start the deployment process, which looks a lot like every single Azure service that's out there, right? So it's super awesome that it's pretty straightforward. There's a handful of things that you need. So the resource group, the location, the resource name, the SKU. Remember, there's only one SKU right now. That in theory, down the road, there will be additional SKUs, but that's where you specify it. And it will automatically default to 3, but you could go up higher than that. Now, the address block itself, it requires a minimum of a /22 CIDR network, so that's what it ingests. But what's weird is you don't actually plug that in anywhere. That's just the networking that it needs to be happy with networking all in. That IP address scheme is only used by vSphere. So then, when you think about the VNet, you can create one, you can leave it blank. A lot of customers at this point in their journey might already have an express route. You may want to leave the virtual network blank, which you can, and then reconfigure the express route on the back end. So the service comes with vCenter, vSAN, Hcx, NSXT, but then it also comes with an express route. So the express route's what actually connects the vSphere networking into Azure. So it's just like the SAP deployment sitting on the S-series VMs, which aren't really VMs, they're actually true physical servers. Same concept exists here. You get an actual express route. So then you would create like an Azure Bastion and a jump host. Could be a jump host with a public IP that you configure just in time. You need something to access that web GUI. Unfortunately, without it, you wouldn't be able to access anything. So, and then from there, you create the VNet gateway and gateway subnet. That's to connect the express route into Azure. Now, if you specify the virtual network, so Microsoft will go through and do all of that magical work for you. If you don't, then you need to go through and create that VNet gateway, peer everything into Azure, etc., and then you would connect to the express route. So I found that out recently too, because I freaked myself out thinking I did something wrong. And no, if you specify the virtual network and it's got the right gateway subnet in it, Microsoft will handle the deployment features of peering the express route into Azure. So then you want to be able to connect your on-prem kind of environment to AVS. So you'll connect to the Azure Bastion host. You'll connect to the jump host behind the Azure Bastion host. You'll connect to vCenter, and then you will kind of open up a web console, and that allows you to connect to vCenter. Now, prior to a recent change, and I want to say the last 2 or 3 weeks, you had to specify a password. Now you don't, and I'll showcase where that shows up. But all of that's generated for you during the deployment process, both for vCenter and NSXT, and you don't have to change the password. So customers who embraced this earlier on had to change it about every 90 days. Now it's a matter of they open up a ticket, Microsoft does whatever magic they do on the back end, and then you just copy it from the portal each time, and you never even see that password. It's kind of a cooler engineering feature. Now, in order for networking to happen between on-prem and Azure, you need an express route circuit on-prem, and that needs to be privately peered into Azure. So that's what helps you be able to have routes be advertised from on-prem into Azure, and then from AVS into Azure to on-prem. So the feature you have to enable is global reach, and so that's where it gets a little squirrely. It's essentially introducing BGP to an environment, and sometimes certain environments aren't ready for it. But it's just a matter of if you think this is an awesome opportunity to go down this path, I'd recommend partnering up with your Microsoft team. They'll pull in what are called global black belts, and there are folks who are way smarter than I am who can come in and help you understand what that networking stack looks like in order to turn on BGP. Then you configure the on-prem environment to connect to VMware Identity Manager. There's also a way you can integrate Active Directory in. Right now it's a ticket. You have to have a domain controller that has line of sight to the ABS environment. So there's a number of ways to think through sign-in and verification on that front without having to lean on the account that gets provisioned for you during the process of spinning up ABS. So let's talk a little bit here about the managed components. So you've got your familiar and consistent tools, right? So you don't have to embrace the portal if you don't want to. In fact, I used to joke that if you didn't really want to tell your VMware admins because there was massive anxiety, people were freaking out, that they didn't, that you didn't have to tell them, right? You could actually just say, this is the VMware environment you're accessing, do what you normally do. And there's a handful of ways that they could probably poke around and see that it's not sitting where it normally used to sit. But it's one of those things too, where does your VMware admin care? It's kind of a 50-50, right? Hard to really say. But you do get that operational consistency. So somebody's not looking at something that they're not familiar with, right? So you can continue to use those VMware resources. You've got, the vSphere client, NSXT manager. You can access vSphere, Hcx, NSXT. Those are all enabled during the deployment process. The credentials, like I said, are registered in Azure, and I can show you how you can access that. So I think that's a kind of a cooler thing, because literally prior to, somebody had to type in a password, hit submit, 90 days later, or about that time frame, open up a ticket with Microsoft, reset the password again. It's just not a fun reality. Wouldn't you rather do it once and never have to go back to it? So we listened to our feedback, we adopted it, and now it's a better process to authenticate in. The seamless management's kind of cool here too. So sorry for the awkward picture. I was trying to showcase how easy it was. So this is the cluster I just deployed, would have been like a week ago now. And that's just showing how simple it is to change the cluster node. So you can do it programmatically via AZCLI or PowerShell. You can also go into the portal and click on the ellipses over there and edit. So that's awesome. So you can scale up, you can scale back as you need inside the portal, the Azure CLI or PowerShell. So the idea though is you just can't go below 3 nodes. So this is the math here, right? So it's a minimum of 3 nodes per cluster, a maximum of 16 nodes in a vSphere cluster, and a maximum of 64 nodes in an Azure Private Cloud instance or an SDDC, Software Defined Data Center. So those are like the as-is numbers. This is always being reworked. We're taking feedback, we're applying it to the product. I suspect this will change at some point because more and more customers are getting to that point where they really like this service and they would like to have more of the service. And Microsoft, like a good service provider, is saying, okay, cool, let's go figure out what we can do to give you what you need. Because at the end of the day, you can integrate and integrate and integrate, but if you're happy with AVS, you can stay on it. The plan is to support it until we have no customers on AVS, and that's going to be well into the future. This is really cool. I really like this slide a lot, and I actually was on Lisa's podcast over the summer, last summer. I think we met for the first time last July, and I wanted to show this, but it didn't work out. So Lisa, now you get to see this. This is the slide. I think I could actually send this to you, but now I think everybody gets a good feel for it, right? So it's like every single cloud shared responsibility model, you've got certain sides of this that Microsoft maintains and certain sides of this that's your responsibility. I don't know about you, but looking at this, the fact that I don't have to worry about patching the host, I don't have to worry about maintenance of the host, I don't have to worry about hardware failures, I'll give it to Microsoft, right? That's a pretty compelling story. I don't want to get any more phone calls at 2 in the morning. I think those days are over, and I think a lot of admins are at that point. Wouldn't it be better if Microsoft dealt with that? Yes. So this is the responsibility model. You get to focus on the cooler side. So life cycling your application, guest OS, applications, the virtual machines you create, and how big they are, right? So they have to sit within the right parameters of what you're able to do inside of your AVS environment. But it's still one of those things where I'd rather be focusing on that than my power supply failed on my host. Like I don't know, there are plenty of nights where I'd be freaking out, rushing into the office, swapping out power supplies, making sure that I could fail things over, swap that power supply in, or upgrade RAM. I mean, God, if you add any more RAM to a host, sometimes it would take like 25 to 30 minutes to reboot the host. Meanwhile, you're freaking out. Let Microsoft do that, right? That's what this model really is showcasing. Microsoft will handle that for you. You don't have to worry about it the same way that you used to. So I'll talk a little bit about the network architecture. So this is the basic interconnectivity model. So that's what you get out the gate, right? Notice there's no lines drawing the AVS environment into your on-prem environment. So you get that AVS environment, you get the AVS network, remember that /22 network? From there, you get to peer into Azure by way of the express route that you have there. So hopefully you can kind of see where that line of communication happens. This is great if you're just demoing some basic integrations inside of Azure. Right now, we're trying to figure out how we build out more content because we have this model, and I think we need the full interconnectivity model. So we're trying to figure out who has access to it internally at Microsoft so we can build up some content. You know, because it's one of those things where we even struggle. How can we demo this the right way for customers so they actually know what to expect and what to look at? But this is great for just getting a feel for what AVS is like. In fact, this is the recommended pattern to start. And then it's a matter of leaning on full interconnectivity. So that's where you take your express route circuit from on-prem into Azure, you peer it privately into Azure. Then you take your express route that was provisioned with the service, and you enable global reach, and that those BGP routes are advertised between on-prem all the way into your AVS environment. So that's how you handle your migration patterns using Hcx Enterprise. The crazy part about it is without it, let's say you did a site-to-site VPN, and let's say you wanted to do a bunch of migrations, maybe even a bulk migration. Microsoft, or sorry, not Microsoft, VMware wouldn't back that from an SLA perspective. So that's one thing to factor into the mix. If you're thinking, I could probably do the same thing with the site-to-site VPN because it's over the internet and it's not dedicated fiber, VMware is a little bit more hesitant to back it with an SLA. Now you could do it, right? It's definitely very doable. In fact, a lot of customers do that when they're starting to kind of build up the muscle of how this works. But the idea is you'd want that express route of your own peered into Azure so that you could actually have the AVS express route traffic both to Azure and to on-prem, and then going the other direction too. And this is the VPN component. So a lot of our customers will start with this because it takes forever and a day to get express route. I don't understand why. I used to make a lot of terrible jokes about how somebody must be walking that from one side of America to the other. And that doesn't work in, you know, parts of Europe because, you know, your country is like only a state or two, which just blows my mind away. But anyway, that was always my joke. And but you can set this up right now if you had an AVS environment. In fact, I'm going to experiment with some of this because if you just need that site-to-site networking, you don't necessarily care about the migration path. So maybe this is a good scenario for you. Or if you're just experimenting, trying to get some VMs over to figure out the right way to make that move, it's supported in that kind of like, that's why I have that asterisk there, just so that you don't think it's 100% backed from an SLA perspective by VMware and Microsoft. So let's talk a little bit about migrate. How am I doing on time? Okay, we're doing pretty good on time. So just like anything, assess your environment, identify the workloads. That's not an easy process, especially if you have the technical excellence, like my boss likes to call it, because I manage these massive environments. I never knew exactly what my middleware teams were doing when I would provision servers for them. And then they would add more servers eventually because we'd have them in instances that they could just go spin things up on demand. So if you don't know what you have, you definitely want to assess, you definitely want to identify the workloads. You'll have to define the migration pattern. So you can either do a live migration with vMotion, you can do a bulk migration with vMotion, or a cold migration with vMotion. What are the differences? Well, it largely comes up to the fact that a live won't require downtime. Bulk is really geared towards you've got a change window of a weekend, you want to get 100 servers up. A bulk would be a great reality. It's also the only way that something that's older, so vSphere 5.0 can get into AVS. We support vSphere 5.0 plus, so anything newer than 5.0, but 5.0 is at end of life. So there's no graceful way to, because a lot of software enhancements happened after 5.0 that helped you might be able to migrate with a live vMotion. Doesn't work for the older version. So that's when you'd have to factor in bulk migration or even cold migration where the VMs are completely off. And then you want to identify the steps for kind of full production, right? So it's just like anything. You've got a POC, you kind of spin up that whole environment, you build out the MVP, the workflow, then you start to really figure out how do we get this to be 100% ready for production. The testing and validation phase comes next. Right, so that's sort of like the POC, you create the private cloud, you move a few VMs using the preferred migration type, you get everybody comfortable, and then you start figuring out when can we move more of what we have on-prem into Azure. Then you transition to production, right? That's where you do the at-scale migration and adoption. We have a number of Microsoft partners, and I just sat in on the Partner Bootcamp this week. there are a number of partners who are excited for this offering. So if you don't have the ability to handle this, or if you are a Microsoft partner, know it's an option, and definitely connect with me. I'll get you with the right people at Microsoft so that you can actually go through your partner certification and audit. And then we've got Microsoft Fast Track as well. So they're kind of like your, it's kind of like jump starting the environment. They're kind of like, if your car's stalled and won't work, they're kind of your jumper cables, so to speak. There are also extra resources that can help you with your migration. So the coolest thing is, and this was in public preview up until Ignite, you could use Azure Migrate. So Azure Migrate now, you can always just do straight IaaS, but you also have the opportunity now to create an assessment that has you landing your workloads on-prem into AVS. And it looks very similar to this, so it's no different than what you would see if you're familiar with the IaaS components of what an Azure Migrate assessment looks like. It's just the price tag's going to be a lot higher because it's VMware. But I also make the terrible joke with VMware in the room, and they usually are like, oh, that VMware kind of conditioned customers to pay a little bit extra. So I see more customers that are at that kind of enterprise scale freaking out less and less about that kind of sticker shock value, right? Like I would if it was just me, because I'm thinking, God, that's a lot of money. But customers who have a ton of investments in VMware, that's almost nothing. So, cost is always an interesting conversation. There's ways in which to even reduce that cost too. So this is the Hcx component for migration. It's the hybrid cloud exchange. So that's by default, you get Hcx advanced, and that won't handle the migration path. So there is, it's a roadmap item. They're working on Hcx Enterprise to have that be what gets deployed with your AVS environment. So this is really how you handle your vMotioning between on-prem and in Azure. So it also can handle vSphere to vSphere migration as well. So if you bought it, if you have licensing, you can take advantage of it if you're just trying to get some VMs out of your one specific data center into a different data center. So it's not like it's a terrible investment if you're a VMware shop. Like I said, it's vSphere 5.0 to any vSphere version, including AVS, sitting on 6.7 Update 3. You can think about leaning on HCX for site pairing and DR, which is also awesome. It's kind of like SRM Lite. And I think SRM is also a roadmap item. So, definitely keep paying attention to the space, especially if you're a heavy VMware shop. You got parallel VM migration threads, which is also pretty cool. It feels a lot faster. It's not single threaded. You can get your VMs into Azure faster. You can also think about no change in IP. Now, when I talked about the networking slide a couple of slides earlier, the recommended pattern is to pick a virtual network where nothing overlaps. If you wanted to use HCX, you could think about that acting as sort of a shim to allow those IP addresses to be exchanged between on-prem and in Azure. Now, granted, I always have those questions too with customers. Do you really need the same IP? Like, where does this exist in your environment? Where is it hard-coded? Is that really the right pattern? Because it's not. But sometimes the dev who built the proprietary app is no longer at the company, and people are afraid that it's going to completely tank. So I get it. This is an opportunity to keep the same IP addresses as well. It becomes that secure proxy for vMotion and replication traffic as well, which kind of helps those security conversations with customers. Okay, so now we're at the demo. So let me see how we're doing in the chat. Make sure is there any. So okay. So yeah, so we've got some good questions there. What I will do is I will showcase the demo, and then I'll go through and I will answer some of those questions. So keep them coming. Okay, so this is the one that belongs to my team. These are the ones, I think these are my engineering team's environment. So I will just kind of showcase what it looks like to build the Azure VMware solution. So I can't deploy it in the subscription. Typically, I can deploy it in the subscription I'm going to choose. It's just going to whine because it's already configured in this environment. So if I were to have deleted it and then gone through the reprovisioning, that wouldn't show up there. But I also wouldn't be able to really demo much of anything because it takes about 2.5 hours to 3 hours to provision, and that's because it's essentially plugging 100% of everything that I just talked about. So vSphere, NSXT, HCX, vSAN. All of that in the mix, and it's provisioning it on bare metal hosts. So it takes time, and remember that firmware has to be upgraded in the process for those hosts. Things like that do take time because it's still VMware. It still takes forever and a day to reboot those hosts. It's just you don't have to be the one doing it, right? So then you would just plug it into a resource group. Remember, it's going to only be a handful of regions. It's going to showcase the recommended regions. This one's in North Central, but it's going to whine about this This is where you type in, we'll just call this because I'm not going to create it. The SKU won't load down here, but the only SKU that shows up when you build this is the AV36 node. And this is where if you say you decided you needed 4 or 5, this is where you would specify the hosts. This is where you would type in an address block. So let's just do 192. Oh no, actually let's do this. 10.10.0.0/22. Now remember, that's something that you only see inside of NSXT. And this is where you can tie it to a virtual network, right? But literally it's just review and create. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's crazy how simple it is. You can automate this with an ARM template. You can automate this with a Terraform template. You can automate this with an AZ CLI script, a PowerShell script. I'm going to be working on some of that with the engineering teams over the next couple of weeks here. We hope to have some cool content to share. But again, remember that it's going to take about 2.5 hours to 3 hours to provision. I always say take a break, go grab coffee, maybe take a nap. It's kind of a long time. Hopefully you don't have like kids or pets waking you up. So what does it look like when it's deployed? Let's go into here. So it's just like a lot of other Azure services, right? You've got your overview, which showcases where it's, hang on, let me do this. I like to not have the subscription show up there. There we go. So Azure Mask is on, but it's weird to have it present correctly inside of Edge sometimes. So it just shows you, so this is the actual IP range I picked when I built it. Oh, sorry, it's really the 10.5.0.0/22, but it takes the peering subnet, it takes the secondary peering subnet, and it kind of carves things up for you. So just like every Azure service, you get activity log, IAM, right? Know that if you want to deploy and destroy and redeploy, you have to have at least contributor rights to the subscription. And I'd recommend contributor over, say, owner. Nobody really needs owner unless you're involved with billing and you know what you're doing. It's kind of my 2 cents. I try and shy away from owner, and of course then they give everybody at Microsoft owner permissions to their own subscriptions so we can build things for customers. It locks, won't go through that. This is the great way to take a look at your connectivity tab. So this is the vMotion network, and maybe, hang on, I think I will. I just don't like to have my subscription GUID in there. You can tell I am a security nut. So that's what it carved up for the vMotion network. That's what it carved up for the private cloud management network, right? I have it internet disabled. You could enable it. It will require a public IP on your AVS cluster. This is where you get your express route components. This is the ID and the private peering ID. This is where you create the authorization key. So I've got this one, I had Microsoft provision. That's the way it comes in, and then you can always copy the key here over on this side. This was just for some documentation to showcase how you configure the global reach auth key. I'm going to minimize that. So that's kind of a cool reality. This is your Hcx components here. So right now it's Hcx Advanced. Remember, that's going to change. At some point it'll be Hcx Enterprise. This is the Hcx Cloud Manager IP. So that's where I would go if I was in the environment to take a look at it. These are your Hcx keys. Remember, the public IP isn't configured, and this is your express route global reach configuration. So where you would do all your configurations to have the routes get propagated from on-prem into Azure and all the way into AVS, as well as all the way back down to on-prem. So this is the cool newer neat feature I like. So maybe I should have just left it as is because it wouldn't have been on there for that long. But so here's the web client ID. So let's go down. 10.5.0.2. Here's the admin username. Admin at vsphere.local, and remember, prior to this change, you had to type a password in for both your vCenter environment as well as your NSXT environment, and it had to be changed about every 90 days. So people were like, I don't like this model at all. So guess what? I don't even see what it is. And I mean, I guess I could paste it in here, but it's not worthy of doing it. But the idea is, you know, I don't really go through it like this with customers, but I could conceivably paste it in here, but you don't have to, right? So NSXT shows up in here as well. And the reason I'm kind of doing it this way is I'm showing you the way it carved everything up for me. The virtual network is a 10.0.0.0/16 that it's connected to, but this is just kind of like a I don't know, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. It's kind of like one of those weird injected PaaS services. This is never exposed to anything unless you enable global reach. Then you can start to see some of these IP ranges. But outside of that, you would only see this inside of AVS and inside of any VMs that you deploy in that environment. Same thing, password shows up there. The clusters are here. So I've just got one cluster, 3 hosts. I could edit that. I could go up. Now, this tells you right here, if you need more than 4 hosts, you have to request a quota increase. Now, you can only imagine, right? We don't want to give this to just anybody if they're not going to keep it around for a bit. That's the kind of the gotcha. You can keep it around for a handful of months. You can keep it around for a handful of years. We really don't care, but spinning it up and then taking it away within 30 days is kind of a harder reality for our capacity management teams, especially given the constraints that we've had with COVID, things like that, right? So that's one thing to just be conscious of if you're trying to play around with this. And that's why I want to share the hands-on labs, because it's a great way to do the hands-on and get a feel for what it's like. There are 2 hands-on labs right now. One is the deployment and connectivity. The other one surrounds HCX and migration. So I will definitely for sure send that over. And then I don't know how this gets distributed, but I would definitely encourage you taking a look at that as well as going through the Learn module, because the Learn module kind of walks you through it with some text and some great pictures that we were able to capture, as well as just kind of that overview of how everything gets deployed. So how are we doing on time? Okay, so Lisa, I swear to God, this is the last thing I'm gonna do, and then we can go into our thing. Oh, and I need to answer some questions too. So yeah, so I will, I will do this as fast as possible. So let me go back into the resource group. So I've got a jump host. I'm going to connect to it over the Bastion. Actually, I think it's in my notes. I think. Hang on. I should have grabbed this prior to. My apologies. Oh, it looks like it went away. So hang on. Let me grab the password for the jump hosts. Oh, come on, man. Just copy it. There we go. Okay. So let's go back into here. Oh, that's what it did. Sometimes I feel like I don't even know what I'm. There we go. Okay. Connect. Now this will open up a brand new window. It'll authenticate me in. And it looks just like a Windows server, because that's what it is. No. So now comes the cool part. And I don't think, is it in my buffer? Let's see, 10. There we go. So let's see, let's do it like this. I believe that's what, yep, cool. So I'm going to cancel this. Now remember, I'm in Azure. Let's go back to here. Let's go to identity. We'll grab the admin password. And Lisa, you'll actually love this. So I'm going to show you what shows up. You'll get a kick out of this. So let me go over here to check it out. They're Dell hosts, which is kind of cool. So I haven't done too much because we just got this environment last week to build out a lot of cool content, but it's just like VMware that you'd be used to on-prem. You know, your VMs would show up underneath here, your resource pools would show up underneath here. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I think what I'll do now is I will first stop sharing and I will go into the chat unless anybody has any questions. You can always come off mute at any point. I'll start there. Anybody daring enough to come off mute?
I have a question, but I'll go on you first.
Sure.
Yeah, go.
So maybe I misunderstood, Shannon. You know, you just log into your screen and you're looking at ESXi hosts. Then you got networking. So if it creates like a redistributed switch, how's that reflected in Azure? Is that just VNets and subnets?
So it actually lives in NSXT. So the distributed switching and all of the networking happens there. That's something I know like this much. I'm not a networking person, but everything happens there. So all the distributed switches that you're used to configuring inside the actual vCenter console, you can configure inside the NSXT manager. That's what we've done because we have seen a lot of issues with networking, and that's the hardest part of this. It's really pretty straightforward. As you saw, you just fill in a handful of fields and it's up and it's functional. And if you fill in the virtual network network, it'll do all the peering for you. So the idea is, though, to lean on the NSXT kind of layer to handle all of that. So that's where you would do all your like specific segments. That's where you, and think of segments kind of like a switch. That's where you would carve things out and have them be a little bit more organized, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
So, quick question from me. VMware is obviously available on AWS as well. How does that conversation go where you've got a customer who has a footprint in AWS and Microsoft, and they're trying to make that decision?
Good question. So we try to do what's best for the customer. We don't try and do like any super competitive things. I think that's true on the AWS side, but I haven't talked to a customer for a bit on this front. If the customer looks at the pricing concessions, so if the customer looks at the reserved instances, for example, or something like hybrid use benefit, if those seem to be more of a conversation that's compelling enough for the customer, that would potentially have them maybe pick AVS versus AWS. Also, we have the Azure Active Directory integration. I think most customers nowadays have something, right, inside of Office 365. They may still have their Exchange servers on-prem, but they finally got Azure Active Directory. So that's another conversation that kind of lends itself towards maybe picking AVS versus AWS. But I mean, at the end of the day, we're just happy if we were even in the conversation in terms of like, where do I go? Because it's a newer offering. So AWS is a little bit more kind of feature-rich components that we are building kind of in flight. So there have been conversations where AWS is kind of the clear-cut victor just because of where they are in terms of their development lifecycle of the platform. Cloud Simple was around in 2018. And then we launched this kind of second iteration, or ABS, just without the Cloud Simple designation, this year. So I suspect if your company's interested and you are also kind of on board, the next couple of years here are going to be pretty interesting. I think we're going to catch up, or at least we're going to try to catch up, right? Oh, I think Lisa, you might be on mute.
Yeah, the 2008 moving your workloads, your 2008 workloads, and getting the extended security and patch updates is, I didn't realize you got that on AVS. You get that on Azure Stack Hci and Hub as well. And also, I'm not sure if this is still the case, but AWS and their VMware on AWS, I think it was only recently, and I'm not even sure if this has now happened, but you had to go and buy 2 different portals.
Yeah. You did, and that's why
Completely.
we decided. Yes, and that was the case. That was the way it was with Cloud Simple. You had 2 different portals. You had one to manage your AVS environment, one to manage your Azure environment. Now everything's in the same portal.
Yeah.
And another thing I didn't talk about, but there's a simplified NSX interface too. So if you're a customer that doesn't have a lot of NSXT background, you can go into the portal and configure a lot of that. So a lot of that's kind of the interesting components there. So some customers were cool to adopt that, some customers didn't, and the customers that didn't really like the fact that it's kind of integrated into the portal, and then go configure those segments in the portal without having to click around NSXT Manager and potentially misconfigure it, because there's a lot of steps to kind of configure NSXT. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it's just kind of a cool story in the sense that we're trying to meet every customer where they are, regardless of where they are, and just give them options, right? So this is another option that you could potentially think about. It is going to be an investment. It's not, a cheap reality, unfortunately. But I will say that VMware's done a good job in the sense of kind of conditioning enterprises, especially big, large companies that have the existing investments, the existing skills, et cetera. Kind of is one of those things where it kind of lends itself well to why you would potentially pick it. Okay, so let me go through the questions. Do you need a dedicated express route for AVS, or can you use, okay, so AVS, you get an express route with AVS, and then in order for it to be fully 100% backed by an SLA with VMware, if you're going to migrate, you need to also factor in an express route of your own. So the reason why it's got a heavier price tag is you're getting an express route circuit with your AVS deployment. There's no way to say, I don't want the express route circuit. Without it, there's no way for your bare metal hosts to even hit Azure, because they're completely separate from Azure. And then in order to have that SLA be met, you need the extra express route circuit with global reach enabled. So how does the cost measure up against VMware and private clouds overall? Is there a significant saving in a 3 nodes there? I think it just depends. So if you're going to make the investment with reserved instances, it's a pretty compelling story. Your engineering staff doesn't have to take the time away from their job and go learn IaaS or go learn all the intricacies of Azure, because it feels like you're drinking from a water bottle, or not. Well, I just said water bottle because Lisa drank from her water bottle. No, fire hose is probably the better analogy, right? And I feel like that way because I've been at Microsoft now a little over 3 years, and all we do is just drink from the fire hose. So it's a little easier to think about from that perspective. So it's not necessarily just cost saving; it's also just time saving. So isn't it easier to go that route? Probably.
Your shared responsibility matrix comes in there, right? Cost is an interesting discussion right now. A lot of we're getting a lot of those discussions on Azure Stack Hci with the new cost model of the $10 per core. Like you said earlier, VMware have sort of accustomed their customers to paying more, and it's almost like Hyper-V or with Azure Stack Hci OS, they're trying to like level their offering within the sort of hypervisor, the OS market by charging by core and then layer on top services, but still will probably be cheaper than VMware. But I think your things like the shared responsibility matrix, like you were just doing a deployment there, and you know you like it was a couple of clicks and you kind of can forget about the rest, thinking about the time that you save. Something I heard recently was the difference between, so instead of talking about return on investment so much with cloud, it's return on innovation. So like, what does it give you? What time does it give you back, and what could you use that time for? But
like I said, you could take more naps, right? I mean, I think we all could use more naps, right?
exactly.
But yeah, but I mean, think about it. Like, if anybody has ever done anything with their VMware environment, they've upgraded RAM. That was always the thing that took forever and a day. And you're like, I hope this comes back up, you know? And it would take forever because it has to go through the RAM check. And I'm like, yeah, we made this be 128 gigs on this host. It's got to go through every single DIMM. And I'm like, we got to go do something else. But Microsoft's on the hook for all of that, right? So that's kind of a cool reality. Okay, so let's see. There are not yet examples on GitHub. There will be, as well as an ARM template price up, right? There's a couple of PowerShell scripts that live out there. There's a blog the GBBs host, and I think there is a PowerShell script that shows up there. So one of the links I will send will, if you dig around in there, you can find the script, and it asks you what you want, like how many hosts, like, you know, what region, what resource group, what VNet. So it's kind of cool. They did a lot of write hosts in that whole script. It's kind of cool. Let's see. So if you have a customer who deploys this and moves everything to Azure and slowly reduces their on-prem investment with all workloads running in Azure, can they switch to traditional? Yes, you can, for sure. For sure, because guess what? Some other customer could probably use your bare metal nodes, depending upon where they are in their life cycle, right? Like, that's why we have capacity management teams. That's why they always are constantly assessing all of that. So if it's at end of life, we'll just scrap it. If it can be repurposed because it's still a newer bare metal offering, then we'll just get another customer on it, right? Let's see, are there any limitations compared to on-prem? And on the flip side, are there any additional features via Azure? Okay, so you don't have access to the host itself. So like Zerto is always that squirrelier one. It requires root access, for example. There's a lot of metrics that customers want to run, storage performance, et cetera. You don't have root access, and there's a reason for that. Microsoft should only be the one that goes in there. So we're trying to work out some in between, some just in time. I think that's a roadmap item, if I remember correctly. Again, don't quote me because I'd hate to like misspeak and then somebody's like, God, Shannon said this at this one Azure meetup, because I know it's a common, I guess, complaint that a customer loses root access. But I mean, if Microsoft's maintaining it for you, it makes sense why that would happen. So that's one thing that would change. And then are there any additional features? Oh, go ahead.
So do you have to back up the VMs as VMs rather than as at the infrastructure level?
You do, yeah. You back them up as VMs.
Right.
So they're so right now Commvault's ready for it. Veeam is ready for it. There's a handful of other vendors that are in the in the hopper, so to speak. I think Commvault, Veritas, and Veeam. I think those are the vendors right now. I know there's other vendors that are going through the process. So if you've got one of those vendors, you're covered. If you've got a different vendor, just have a conversation with them. I know that there's a number of them in the hopper right now, but I'm not able to share that with you at the moment because it's still kind of underneath NDA with the customer. Well, and they're a customer of ours, right? Like, it's not. Hopefully you understand that. So yeah, so that's one thing to factor in. Let's see. And then any additional features, I think it's just the idea you could spin up anything. You could start playing around with web apps. You could start playing around with load balancers, web application gateways. You could have those services work in conjunction with VMs that live on AVS, right? There's a lot of neat things you can think about doing to extend what you're already doing. So you can kind of get familiar with Azure. You can think about Azure Active Directory, think about Azure Monitor, Azure Security Center. If you don't want to bring your SIEM from on-prem into Azure, that's an option. So I think that's kind of the thing you get when you move everything into Azure. So let's see. Thanks for joining, Mohammed. He's probably already gone. Yeah, it was about 10 minutes ago. Let's see. What kind of express route circuit is it? Do you choose your connection partner? You can, yes. I don't remember what the recommended pattern is. That's where your Azure Migrate assessment would be kind of helping you out on that front. But it's just a regular express route circuit that is connected into Azure with private peering. So usually a lot of customers, if they have one, they would just have that be another peering point, and that would be used strictly for AVS communication. So hopefully that answers all your questions. And like I said, I'll follow up with Imran and Shabazz. I'll follow up with both of you. You guys can pass along those links. It dawned on me after I had started sharing my screen, I didn't put any links in there because I moved a bunch of slides around. And so yeah, so you're my first guinea pigs on the new slide deck for the year. Well, it's not really the year. I think actually this is probably my first event for the year though. So yeah, so that's kind of AVS in a nutshell. Feel free to connect with me. Feel free to, if you've got more questions on the road, happy to answer them. Happy to, if you work for an ISV, if you work for a customer, I can always help by kind of bridging the gap on who you talk to at Microsoft if you're not sure, if your company's interested and you're not sure how to move forward, I can help you out on that front. I can help you out if you're an ISV talking to the right people internally at Microsoft if you're interested in some of the partner-based stuff surrounding AVS.
That's great.
Let's see, does it allow for over-provisioning the hosts? Let's see. Yes, well, so it's just like any VMware cluster. It'll share whatever it can, and you can over-provision your environment, and you can see yourself kind of shooting yourself in the foot, so to speak. So that still does happen in this scenario.
That's great. Thank you very much, Shannon. That was 2 great sessions. Could we give Shannon a round of applause, everyone?
Thank you.
Right. Let's move on straight to the bonus session. This is
the one that Lisa and I spent more time on. So that
Yeah.
we can say that, right?
Yeah, so this is
Yeah.
a joint session between. So yeah, this is a joint session between Lisa and Shannon, and they're both going to give us and share their thoughts and tips on how men can be better allies to women in tech and in the world in general. So over to you, ladies.
Perfect. Lisa, are you gonna share?
Yes, I'm going to share. I'm not going to lie, guys. I've started yawning. I feel like usually I'm on the couch watching Netflix. By now, this is the most socializing I've done in a while. Okay,
You'll need
guys.
to take a day off to recover, right?
Well, you know what? I looked at my calendar for tomorrow, and I start at 8:30, and I don't finish till 5:30, and I
Oof.
may have half an hour for lunch. So
Oof.
yeah, it's one of those days, right? So, right, guys. So this is an interesting bonus session. It's a touchy subject, right? Especially over the last month, especially over the last events of the month, especially in the UK. A lot's been going on. But me and Shannon, we talked about this actually in our podcast, and I'll share the link to that. So if you haven't had enough of us after tonight and you want more, there's more, and we can share that.
Pretty soon we'll take this on like a road show or something. We'll have to figure out a way to get our companies to pay for us to tour all over and get people excited about women in tech. Because I feel like it's like a mixed bag, right? It's not always 100% like, yay! And I want it to be. So hopefully we, get you guys excited about what our thoughts are.
Yeah, and to be fair, me and Shannon touched on this a little bit in our podcast as well, is if I'm being brutally honest, so I'm going to be 34 this year. I know I don't look it, but I am. But if I'm brutally honest, back in the day, so like younger, early 20s, I would often get asked to talk because of women in tech or things. And I avoided it at all costs because I was determined that if I was going to make it, it wasn't going to be because of that. Now, whilst I still think there is merit within that mindset, I think it was very naive of me, and it was probably a little bit immature. It was also to do with the fact that I would go to a lot of women in tech events and potentially not. I didn't feel it. They felt more exclusive than inclusive, right? So there's a whole bunch of things that went into that. As I've got older, I would say over the past year specifically, about all the things that we've had going on, I realized that representation really matters, and that I almost have a responsibility to represent and to be seen. So it's funny because I've had some of these conversations with the likes of Shannon, some other of my guests, and I'm starting to get into it, but I would say, and I don't know if Shannon's the same, but I would say that this is an interesting journey for us to get into, because like Shannon said, there's so many different views around it. So bear with us, let us know feedback. If you want to ask questions, definitely ask questions. And let's just see how this goes. So let's just take a moment to think about what an ally actually is, right? Because I think sometimes the term gets thrown about and everyone's like, yeah, I'm a good guy, I don't do any of that, you know, all this kind of stuff. But what is an ally? If you look at what it actually is defined as, it's about, I like the banding together and the joining forces in this description. It's really about joining together, you know, being a partner of, and I like that definition. I think it's worthwhile to actually think about what that means. I don't know if you guys have like maybe any thoughts on what it means to be an ally from your perspective. Just have like a little bit of a think about that. But I actually think, like, I like the team up, you know, I like the band together. I like the collaborate, align with, form an alliance, make it a common cause.
And I was going to say, we can't do it alone, obviously, because we're still having these conversations about, you know, women in tech, and we need more of it. And it's like, we can only do it so much. We actually need help from guys to lift us up and to help us out and to be good stewards of women in tech, women in general. And if you're married, your wife will love you even more. So, I mean, she's the real boss, right? I'm kidding. I'm being a little silly. But it's important to state that we can't do it alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that's like a big point that we're trying to make here. We need you guys as allies. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the reality that we live in right now. I'm just going to warn you, this slide is pretty hard hitting, okay? And do you know what? I kind of thought about whether we should have this slide in here or not, but if I'm being brutally honest, and I think, Shannon, you felt the same around Women's International Day, so it's great that we have a day, and we'll come on to that in a minute. I found it really, really hard on March the 8th to share anything online about International Women's Day. Why? I felt like I couldn't say anything authentic that was really me, that also conformed to maybe like the BS that surrounds that day. So of course it's a day to celebrate all the positives, and I love that, and that should absolutely happen. I think it's also become a bit of a fluff day for companies and people to be like, yay, we care about women in tech and we've come so far. But how many years are we going to say we've come so far, right? Anyway, then we had a terrible week from the 8th, okay? We had loads of things happen and it really wasn't great. And I personally started to do more research, and I personally started to reflect on my experiences as a woman, never mind a woman in tech, right? And I think a lot of the things that we've become numb to, that's just accepted, I think I've very much been like that. I'll brush things off. I'm pretty strong. I'll stick up for myself. I'm always a bit of a fighter. But actually, when you look at the reality that we live in, it's a little bit exhausting. So we've come a long way, but there is a long way to go. Violence against women, the discrepancies, the pay gaps, the discrepancies in the pension gaps. I don't know if you guys read the article in the UK recently about the fact that if a woman's basically pension-wise, we will end up about 100. There's a 100k gap that women face, and we would need to start working. Like there's an advert. It's actually like a little girl, and she's like on the phone, and it's like we need to start working a lot earlier, right, to make that up. I heard things like the pay gap was going to take about 60 years to close, but with COVID, it's now 90. Guys, that's 100 years. Like, do you know what I mean? It's just, when you think about it, we're in 2021, it's just crazy. Then you look at the violence, you look at the lack of female in STEM subjects, and you look at the lack of female in tech, and you're just thinking, how many, it's like, how many years are we going to say we've come so far? So I don't want this to get, like, deep and like in your face.
You don't want to scare the poor boys either.
I don't want to scare you guys, right? But it's so true, and this is not. It's interesting because we've seen an outpour of women share their experiences online, right, after the brutal murder of Sarah Everard in the UK, and people think, oh well, everyone's just sharing that online. But I mean, I had discussions with my friends as well, we've just stopped telling each other about when we're catcalled
Yeah.
or when we're followed or things like that. Like, these things happen daily, and like surely that's just, and you know, it'll be nobody here that does it, and that's grand. But the fact of the matter is, we live in a world where this stuff is so normal that we've become numb to it.
Yeah.
So I just want you all to, when we go through the talk, or we're talking about women in tech or anything like that, just have a bit of awareness for the reality of the world that we do live in. This stuff that we might be putting up with, but subconsciously at the back of our heads outside the world. And then let's just try and make the workplace, but tech, the industry, one of the places where it doesn't add to the problem. And I think that's basically what we're trying to say, right, Shannon?
Yeah. I think
Okay.
your next slide, because I almost was going to take away from what the next slide was going to do. So let's let the next slide. So yeah, just the idea that, you know, as much as it sucks and rocks simultaneously, the sucking part of it is we're still a marginalized group of folks, right? We have a month, we have a day. It's just like Black History Month, right, in America, or, you know, anything surrounding racial inequities. We'd like it to be every single day. And the guys I work with that I have just appreciated are the guys that pull me in for the things I know. They're totally fine with that. They bring me along because they know they can't have the conversations that I can have. In fact, you know, knowing infrastructure, it was always the app dev guys that would pull me in, or the data guys that would pull me in. And I always appreciated that, because it's hard to know where you can potentially go find an ally, somebody who knows you know your stuff, and then who cares about you after the fact, right? It's just a matter of caring about your fellow coworkers, making sure that they're having a good time, you know, that they're okay. They're, especially right now, we're all virtual, so it's been a rough reality for everybody. But I think that's just the thing that Lisa and I were saying. Like, in fact, I think there were a lot of F-bombs and curse words when we were like, because her and I, when we get really passionate, we get loud. And it's true though, and I think both of us believe in the fact that it should be every day, it should be every month of the year. So this is a fantastic meme to kind of at least lend us into that conversation point.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the whole point of this point here is it leading on from the last slide. So just awareness of where we actually are, and then the reality of why we have a day or a month or whatever, and the fact that it's great and we love it, and it's a time to shout out about, you know, women of history, women's achievements. That's great, but let's all remember that really the ideal situation would be equality, and I put in, you know, small letters there, not world domination. So you don't need to worry about that.
Lisa and I actually talk about this in our podcast quite a bit, because one of the women I actually just looked up to, she said it's not about taking over the world as a woman. It's about knowing the world that you need to be involved in, finding your niche, and then kind of owning that world. And it's not the full world, it's just your world, the things you can control. And as a result, I really applied that as I grew technically and as I grew in my career. And I've always gravitated towards guys that were similar minded. They may not be exactly the same, but guys that had a funny sense of humor, that loved self-deprecating, because I love self-deprecating humor. But you know, but also just kind of remembering that, like, we're not trying to take over. We're not trying to make everybody change tomorrow. We're not trying to say that, you know, you need to change tomorrow. Just be aware of the changes that need to be made, and hey, we're not going to fault you, especially if you say something like, hey guys, and it's a bunch of women. We're not going to eat you up. We're not going to punch you in the face. Like, no, we've also been conditioned. I say that to women, and then I'm like, God, I shouldn't say that.
Yeah, and do you know what? It's so funny. Like, that's so true. And we'll come on to this in another slide as well. Like, language is really important, but I'll say hey guys all the time. You know, people will say hey guys in a meeting, and then I feel awkward when they have to correct themselves, because usually I'm the only female, like, within, you know, big bunch of group, and then I feel awkward. I'm like, they're like, oh no, I'm a lady, and then everyone's like, ha ha ha, and I'm like, and then I start feeling awkward, and I'm like, no, you don't, you can just call me guys. So it's a weird situation, right? But
Yeah.
it's all about this perspective and this sort of self-awareness. I think these things are really key. So we tried not to drop too many F-bombs, but basically how not to.
We had to drop one. We had to drop
one. Screw up on International Women's Day or ever. These are so obvious, right? And I'm not saying any of you guys do this, but I think these are good key points to just, again, sit down and think about what people need to deal with, and try and, you know, avoid it. Or if you see anyone else. So please don't mention the fact that there isn't a day dedicated to men, because I'll tell you something, every day is white man day. And it's true, right? And there's like facts and figures and history to explain that, right? Whilst we're all about banter, especially me and Shannon, and we've spoke about this, just don't go there. What we loved about this user group actually is, so I actually heard, and it was quite disappointing to be honest. And again, another reason where I didn't just feel like I'd come to social and be like, yay, International Women's Day. I heard from a couple of females who'd been asked to speak at a user group, right? Because it was International Women's Day and it was March. And when they said, cool, what topic would you like me to come and speak at? You know, I can speak on X, Y, and Z. And they would be like, just women in tech. And she's like, okay, so
Which
what about
PS
women in tech?
Which PS is pretty broad. That'd be like asking me to talk about my entire tech career, which has spanned everything from on-prem to Exchange. I mean, it's a pretty broad sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so I think the idea is, the reason why we love this so much is that we could go talk about our tech, and we could spend 5-10 minutes on how to be better allies. So thank you again, guys.
Yes.
We definitely appreciate
Round
it.
of applause.
Round of applause.
And me and Shannon also mentioned this last year. The best thing that you can do, and actually I had a podcast with Steve Buchanan, if you want to listen to that as well, it's brilliant. Steve actually turns the tables at the end and asks me some questions, and we can come on to that topic in a bit. But the best way to be diverse in tech is just to be diverse in tech. Do not ask the women to come on the stage and just talk about being a woman in tech. Don't ask the Black or people of color to come on and talk about diversity and inclusion. Let them come on and let them be their expert in their area and talk tech. The thing that has always, when I've gone to women in tech events, honestly, I felt so uncomfortable. Like if I'm not a female coder, or I've not given birth and coming back to work, it's like I'm not a woman in tech. The best sessions I've had is where the females are just talking about what they do. So I went into a session with a bunch of entrepreneurs and they were just explaining what they did. There was no mention at any point about how they were a female. And that's why representation matters, right? Seeing someone that you can relate to, whether it is gender, color, sexual orientation, they've got the same hobbies, you're just like, oh, I can relate to that person. It's so important. Representation is like the key, the biggest thing to helping us get more diverse in tech. So that's awesome. Try and be empathetic, listen, and show compassion during this time. So again, that's why we did the little bit of setting perspectives at the beginning.
Well, and I think the big thing here, though, too, is if you are empathetic and you listen and you show compassion, guess what? It's not going to only help you in that interaction with your female colleagues. It's going to help you out in the rest of the world. Certain people get so weirdly fine-tuned and they forget that this world's a lot more gray than it's ever been before. You know, you've got to know people's pronouns. You've got to understand how to talk to people who may have completely different backgrounds as you. And so being empathetic and even admitting that you might be wrong, like, oh, I didn't even mean that. You know, and again, too, you know, women, in theory, we won't try and cut your head off. In theory, depends upon how much you piss us off, right? But in theory, we won't try and cut your head off. In fact, what we'll probably do is we'll probably empathize back with you. If you say, oh gosh, I said the wrong thing, I'm really sorry. Hey, I'm sorry too. I still say things like, hey guys, versus hey y'all. You know, the Texas way, right? That nobody lives in America except for me. So that was a terrible joke that went nowhere.
No, we absolutely, the amount of times I now join calls and almost say, hey, y'all, because I speak to so many people in Texas, but I really don't want to say it because they'll just laugh at me in my Scottish accent.
I think you should do it. I think you should do it.
I'm going to do it tomorrow. I have to say this. And yeah, use these events as a way to learn and increase awareness. So like really lean in, like see you guys now sitting here listening, like actually it gives me goosebumps because I can see you like nodding and laughing, and maybe sometimes people are like, oh, that's making me uncomfortable, but that's good. Like that is how we learn and grow. You know,
you're not making people uncomfortable. I think they're fairly comfortable.
Okay, good, because you know. So we just came up with a few bullet points from me and Shannon's discussions about kind of things that we've gone through, right? So like, Shannon, this is a big one for you. Please just treat us like a human being first.
Yeah, like I hate the, oh, a woman's present. Oh, you know, maybe you shouldn't even have that conversation over the phone. It's a work, you know, like.
But then even it can go the other way as well, right? Like so many times I've like come into a meeting and the guys have been having a guy chat, and it's not even that big a guy chat. Like I've probably had
similar guy chats.
Yeah, right. But they will suddenly be, you know, it's more of like there's a difference between when a guy goes, oh, Lisa's now joined, right? So for instance, that's a perfect way to do it. Oh, Lisa's now joined in the chat. Now then I can say, haha, heard you guys, you know, blah, or just I can move on, right? But see, when I join and then someone goes, oh my God, a lady's present, so we must stop now. It's like, you can't define me based on my gender. How do you know that I don't absolutely love the chat that you're currently having?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? It's difficult, right? These things are difficult, but they are little things that matter.
Yeah, and I think also too, you know, realizing that if somebody's coming to you with a question, they're not trying to take over your job. They're not trying to surpass you. They're coming to you because you're smart and you know things and they don't. And if you gatekeep stuff, eventually I'm going to go find somebody else who won't gatekeep stuff, because like anybody that's ever been reluctant to share info with me when I've asked questions, I almost never come back and ask those questions ever again, because they don't want to share, and what they're worried about is that I'm going to take over their job or do their job better or whatever, and that is totally not the case. I don't know, Lisa, if you can see, my cat woke up from her nap. That's my cat right there. She's cleaning herself. Anyway,
was here earlier, but she's disappeared.
I just noticed, I heard her get up, and then I was like, I hope she doesn't start whining because my door's shut. Anyway, but yeah, so I think, you know, just again, we're a person. Like, think of us as, if it's even helpful, this is not a terrible thing to even admit. Think of us as like another guy colleague. Like, treat us like, I mean, maybe not the exact same, but similar. And I think, you know, you're going to find that you're going to make a lot more friends at work than you would if you, I guess, approached a woman in tech a little bit differently. All cats do is clean themselves and sleep.
Yes, that's so true. So yeah, we spoke a lot about this in the other previous slides. Like, self-awareness is the one. Like, self-awareness is key. So see at any point where you do feel uncomfortable or you react in a certain way, whether it's to a female or someone who else is different than you, what you need to do is, don't panic. You're human. You're not a bad person. But take a step back after that interaction and think, why did I react that way? What unconscious bias is causing me to do that? Or what insecurity did I have? Why did I feel uncomfortable about that situation? Vulnerability is powerful. If you've ever listened to, you won't have, but listen to or read Brené Brown on vulnerability, honestly, so listening to The Power of Vulnerability on Audible 2 years ago in the summer literally changed my life. Because up until that point, I was I'm strong and nobody can help me and I don't need no help with everyone, right? And a lot of people will be like that. Listening to that, The Power of Vulnerability changed my life. She talks about how when we're not being vulnerable, you're basically putting on armor, right? You're putting on, I'm strong, I'm this, whatever. All that does is stop you from making real connections with people. So vulnerability doesn't mean, you know, what we all take it to mean, like the big.
It doesn't mean you're weak. It really doesn't mean you're weak. I think that's the big key here. It makes you probably 10 times more strong than most people. This is a TED Talk. It is.
So So you can listen to the talk that she gives, The Power of Vulnerability, on Audible, and it was one of her TED Talks. But I think it was maybe a big session that she did more than a tech talk, because it goes on, it's really long, but her books are really great as well. And she also has a TED talk, so you can watch all of them. But honestly, like when you read about what she has to say, especially if you've got like kids and stuff as well, just so great. She's brilliant. I love her. She's actually from Texas.
Maybe yeah. So she's gonna keep doing the y'alls, right?
Yeah. And we talk about it, empathy, right? Language matters. Think about how ridiculous this is. She is a female developer.
We don't say male developer.
Female CIO, female.
You know what, Lisa, we should start doing that. He's a male developer and see how that goes.
but think about it, right? So you've already said he, and then you're saying male or female, right? Now, to be fair, we should just remove. Well, we barely ever use the word male, but we use the word female all the time, and I have no idea why.
Yeah. Female CIO, female
Lisa
CEO
is right. Plus, also saves you the whole pronoun situation right now, okay? Because that's true. It's something that we all need to get better at, but it's difficult. So it's a habit change. So I mean, but language, not just in that term. I mean, I have been called aggressive, I've been called like a dog with a bone, a pit bull, I can see another cat. Yes, bring on all the cats.
I think it's the same cat. She's the only one that's been in here all day. Oh, look, we've got other cats hanging out. Oh, I love it.
I've been called bossy. I've been called, honestly, like, you should hear the words that I've been called and see. In my 20s, I actually didn't think anything about it. In fact, I probably wore it like a little badge of honor. See, when I think about it now, I'm like, that is not okay. It's not okay because it all starts with language. Language is the foundation which we use. Things become okay. People get numb to it. It then leads up to, certain behaviors. It's really important to be a bit more just aware of the language that we're using, especially if we've got little girls, right? Especially if we've got little girls.
Well, and then P.S. If a guy did that, he wouldn't be called a myriad of awful names. He's just being a guy.
Yeah, and that happens to me all the time. I quite often as well. So I've actually had a few experiences over the last year where in a call, a male has been quite ridiculous with me, to be honest, right? Really ridiculous. And I have had to sort of stick up for myself, and I've done that quite well. But afterwards, because everyone was silent, afterwards I've gone behind and I've checked my colleagues and some other people from other organization to ask if I was out of line, because I'm worried, right? I'm like, have I been too emotional? Does that look like I'm too X, Y, and Z? We've got this constant thought process going on. And people are like, no, he was totally out of line. You handled yourself. That's great. Which is great, and that's fine. But that's a whole headache I just went through. And also, if he was out of line, why did no one step in, not even to say that you're out of line, but just to move the conversation a different way, And that kind of takes us on to, I think, on the next slide, we talk a little bit about being an active bystander and what that means. So think of an ally is not only sort of the definition that we thought about at the start, but think about it as a verb. Think about it as being something that you actually do rather than that you are, If you see inappropriate behavior, call it out. It's not enough to be silent anymore, really, when you think about it. I mean, that said, and I had this discussion earlier today with someone, a man, there are some situations where, people have lots of reasons for not getting involved, and I get that, right? But I think we have to start being more aware of these situations and think about, well, how could you don't need to go in and be the hero, you don't need to be aggressive, we don't need saved, but can you go in and can you distract, can you diffuse, can you just just try and show support in any way, shape or form within those scenarios, and it honestly would go down so well. The last one, you've all got gold stars. Suggest women speakers, support and follow and include. So yep, that's great. Now we don't want to take up your entire evening with this topic, do we? But I think just stopping on this slide, me and Shannon have spoke about a few of our experiences. We've both experienced gatekeeping early in our careers. That's fair to say. Me specifically, in my first job, honestly, I won't go into detail here, but there were some engineers that basically said to me, this is too technical for you, you don't need to know the detail, and they would just push me away. And at that time I was a project manager, and I was just trying to understand what they were working on so I could be a better product manager for them, project manager. And then there was two engineers, big shout out, Kenny Lowe, David Fleming. Honestly, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. I remember them sitting with me in meeting rooms and whiteboarding storage, networking and compute and virtualization until I got it. Until I asked all my stupid questions as not a female, but as someone who was no idea, had a law degree and had literally no idea what these people were talking about. And if it wasn't for them, I genuinely would not be here today. Yeah, Kenny Lowe for the win.
Yeah. So there's a guy here in the Chicagoland area. He was a consultant at at my very first technical firm, and he loved the fact that I just kept digging in and digging in and digging in and digging in. I started fixing things, and he gave me a green black belt, and it was like the funniest thing I could have ever gotten. And he was so encouraging. And now the tides have turned. I have kind of helped him go into the cloud more. And I think his joke to me was, "You became the sensei." And I'm like, I guess I don't know how that happened, but I guess I did, because he would always be the guy I go to for Exchange issues or Active Directory or Windows Server spinning on its tail, and I figured all of it out and kind of propelled myself into cloud. And so then he came to me, and I'm like, this is so adorable. I hope I can give it back to him, because he was really impactful in the way that I the way that I kind of built my career.
Yeah.
Trying
And
to
Kenny's not here. Kenny's not here to defend himself, so I'm going to also say that I have most definitely supported Kenny in his career as well, just because I bring a whole different bunch of skill sets. Very early in our career, I probably did a great job of, so he was like head of innovation at that role, but trying to explain what those guys were trying to do and how it would translate to our customers and our sales teams, etc. Because they brought me in, like, and because they brought me in and they like spent so much time with me making sure I got it, I could then help them out by explaining that to the rest of the business, why we were investing in this R&D, what it was going to bring us in the future, what the opportunity was. And that is what we need more of in the world, people. So on that, I'm going to go to our last slide, which is funny.
And it's true. All I want is better pockets. There's so many. There's so many women's pants that don't. They have like the pocket designation, but it's sewn shut, and I'm like, what? How does this work?
So, pockets, right? Oh my god. And this is one tiny example. So the tweet there about the fact that it was because women could prove they were not witches and carrying spells, that is historically incorrect. So I'm just going to go out there now and like own up, okay? Before you all go and research and tell me I'm wrong. We think that is historically incorrect. But I mean, it fits the narrative, doesn't it? Very well. But on the other side, it's true, right? Women have invisible pockets. Actually, it was due to the fashion era. They took them out so that clothes sat more flush. And the result is that we don't have any pockets that we can carry our phones in these days, right?
Oh my god,
But
yeah, it's awful. Because I like to carry my phone in my pocket, and I've got the XL phone, and it's the Pixel 3 XL, and it's huge.
This is not going in any pockets in any of my clothes, guys. So but this is a funny and a sort of small point of actually when you think, then going back to the beginning, the reality that we live in, right? There is so many things in our lives that because of past tradition, oppression, all this kind of stuff still exists. So even things like, and I don't want to make this awkward for you guys, but the fact that we've only just started to solve period poverty in the UK is mental. It's 2021, right? The fact that we are taxed on more on those products, think about it, it's crazy.
Yeah.
The fact that women's contraceptive is seen as like a way to make money, but no one actually wants to solve our monthly problems. Like, you should see the service that we get at the doctors, and you should see the list of things that they give us with all the side effects, because it's just not deemed an important problem to solve. So again, don't want to get too deep, don't want to make anyone uncomfortable, but we just want more pockets. I mean, that's what we want. We would just like some functional pockets, okay?
So if you happen to find pants or dresses that have like 18 pockets that actually can hold your big smartphone, we will salute you and give you well, until we can meet in person, we'll give you a virtual award. Well, like Lisa and I will like create something hilarious. Yeah. So because like I have a problem finding like pants with pockets that I enjoy, because I'm like, this sucks. So anyway,
every time I buy a dress, which is rare, I didn't wear dresses until I was early 20s. My mum like blackmailed me into it because she would buy me a dress. If someone's got pockets, I buy them. I freaking love pockets. I used to get called Lisa Locket in my pocket at nursery because I'd come home and the tiny pockets on dungarees that are for decoration. I would have shoved like A3 drawings and stuff there. Like, I love pockets. So yeah, I mean, if you take away anything from this, like, all we want is pockets. Yeah. And that's it. That's our how to be an ally to women in tech.
Yeah, thanks for listening, for sure. Yes. Because it's not an easy topic, especially because there's so many different flavors of how you present this.
Yes.
So yeah. I've had guys who are like, there's still not a thing. Like, I have all of these cultural trainings at Microsoft. This is still not a thing. And I'm like, no, it's still a thing. That's why you still have the cultural trainings, So anyway, well, I think that ends the meetup for today.
Does, thank you to you both. We can all come off mute and give both Lisa and Shannon a round of applause.
Thank you.
So I've got the pleasure of closing up. One thing I want to just give you a bit of feedback. You shouldn't worry about offending anybody. These topics, unfortunately, we're still in a position where they need to be spoken about, and until you give hard facts about how brutal it is, people won't wake up to it. So don't worry about offending men or anybody. If anybody does get offended, fuck them. Basically. Sorry to be so blunt, but that's how blunt you need to be. If anybody does get offended, they're the problem. So thank you very much for all three talks. That
Sure.
originally, when I asked you both to come on, and me and Imran and Saj spoke about it, it was for technical talks. The final one was obviously your idea, and we were more than happy for it. It's been really interesting to hear your thoughts on it. So thank you again so much for taking the time out. And just you've done a great job today. Thank you very much from everyone at the Bradford Cloud User Group. So again, one last round of applause.
I would bow if I was there. I'm not.
Do you know what? No, Shannon, you would curtsy.
Oh, I would curtsy.
Remember.
Sorry. I would. But I don't really wear dresses though. I would look kind of silly.
Yeah. And if you're not sick of us already and you want more Shannon and Lisa, because maybe this is going to be a thing, I've linked the podcast in the chat.
Everybody who's listened to it, they've like died of laughter because you and I we would go off on these like random tangents, and it worked. I think we made like Sarah Lean laugh pretty hard when she listened to it. So if you're having a crappy day and you want to listen to us just banter on and on for about an hour, that's the link. So
if you both do any user groups again together, it's definitely one for you to team up again on. It's a great talk. So well done. Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone who's joined us.
Thank you.
So just to get everybody know what we've got planned in April. April's going to be our Teams month. So it's all going to be dedicated to Microsoft Teams. We have Mark Vale on the podcast, who's one of the creators of Commsverse, which is like a collaboration Teams sort of event coming up. And then we are going to have Sam O'Donnell, who's a new presenter. And we also have, I can't remember the lady's name because she only agreed last week. Oh, let me quickly find who it is. Oh, bollocks. I swear too much, I apologise. SharePoint
now I'm gutted I didn't swear. Because
I swear.
I'm trying to be so polite these days when everything's getting recorded.
I know. And I mean, and I'm not joking, like I think Lisa and I we cursed a bit getting prepped for it. I think we did during the podcast too. So
on Twitter she's called SharePoint_Zoe, but she's going to be doing a piece and a presentation on compliance and security with Microsoft Teams. So again, we've got some great stuff planned for April. Yeah, thank you everyone again, and I hope everyone has a pleasant evening.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone.
guys
Thanks,
for having
guys.
us. Bye.
All right, bye.